Okay, so looking at food sources of vitamin A, we see that beef liver, sweet potatoes, spinach, carrots, and herring, this type of fish, are performing really well. Specifically looking at the numbers, right, for like recommended daily allowance, that being 700 micrograms for women and 900 micrograms for men, we see that eating one portion size, or one sort of one serving size of beef liver, that being 3 ounces, so 85, roughly 90 grams of beef liver, that would get you more than 7 times the recommended daily allowance of vitamin A. Similarly, if you eat one whole sweet potato, that would give you more than 1.5 times the recommended daily allowance, and there's a bit of a drop-off. But that's incredibly fascinating, right? Like beef liver, you might have heard that people say beef liver is a super nutritious food, and you clearly see some results from it here, right? Like 3 ounces contributing to 7 times the recommended daily allowance. Now, a few things to be aware of the vitamin A, or a few little notes, is that the deeper or brighter the color of a fruit or vegetable, the higher the amount of vitamin A. Also, vegetable sources like plant sources of vitamin A are fat and cholesterol free, and the absorption of vitamin A from these sources would be improved if you eat these foods with a small amount of fat. Now, a little note about spinach, because that was on the list of like basically one of the top 5 foods for vitamin A, is that it contains oxalic acid, this type of anti-nutrient, and it can bind with excess calcium in your kidneys and create kidney stones, right? And being in the oxalic acid, that being an anti-nutrient, it can lower the absorption of actual micronutrients, so sort of defeating a bit of the point. And one thing that's important to be aware of here is that it can help to cook spinach and other plant foods with anti-nutrients. So, before I continue just rambling on about all of the different vitamins and minerals, I sort of just want to outline what I'm going to do in the video, right? So I'm going to give you guys a complete micronutrient roadmap. And first and foremost, that means actually talking about the nutrients, right? So we've got 2 big types of nutrients, right? Like we've got 2 categories of these. We've got the macronutrients, which can be divided into carbohydrates, into proteins, and into fats, and these make up your total caloric intake. We've got a second group of nutrients, that being your micronutrients. You might have heard of these, right? The vitamins and minerals that we should be consuming. And they're needed for normal cell function, they're needed for growth, and they're needed for development. In fact, a lack of micronutrients can lead to lower energy levels, lower mental clarity, and lower overall capacity. And, in terms of physical and mental performance, like looking a bit more specifically at it, eating micronutrients and consuming these are incredibly important for testosterone, for building muscles, just for energy and for recovery, right? For your sleep to be good, and for brain health, right? Like from your memory to just being mentally acute and aware, right? So these micronutrients are incredibly important to get into our body, but they're not produced in our bodies. And that means that we need to get them from our diet. Now, we're going to first look at vitamins, and vitamins can be divided into 2 categories, right? We've got 13 of these suckers, right? And the first 4, A, D, E, and K, I've already talked about A, but these first 4 are what we call fat-soluble vitamins. So they're basically stored in your fatty tissues, in your muscles, right? Like them being fat-soluble vitamins basically mean that your body holds on to them, right? So we need to be careful about over-consuming them, because they may build up in our body and cause harmful effects. And also, like plant sources in particular, are absorbed like the vitamin A, D, E, and K, the fat-soluble vitamins from plant sources are absorbed more easily by the body in the presence of dietary fat. Now, next up would be the water-soluble vitamins. So the vitamin Bs and the vitamin C, right? And these are flushed out by the body through urine, so you can consume them in a larger amount without that there necessarily being a risk of over-consuming any of these vitamins. Exception to this being B12, which which can be stored in the liver for many years. And you might be wondering why we have that many B vitamins, right? Like, why do we have separate names for all of these except for like vitamin B1 through 12, right? With some small gaps. It's basically that the vitamin Bs, they coexist in most foods and they help with metabolism, basically the breakdown of food. Now, we're also going to talk about 2 vitamin-like nutrients, those being choline and carnitins. They're not vitamins per se, but they're vitamin-like nutrients in how they function and how they are built up. So, let's dive right in. First and foremost, though, I'm just going to say, like as in the case for vitamin A, I'm going to be finding and talking about food sources for these foods, for these vitamins and minerals. So I'm not really going to be looking into fortified foods, right? Foods where they have added in synthetically vitamins or minerals to them, but I'll focus on finding food sources like pure food, single ingredient foods, right? Where you can get the different vitamins naturally, because that's what I find fascinating. Also, quick disclaimer, I'm not a doctor, right? I'm not a medical or licensed professional or any of that. This is just me showcasing the research I've done over the last couple of weeks, right? A bit of a passion project I've had. So yeah, copy the steps in this video, listen to any of this advice or any of these, little bits and bobs around at your own peril. Do what you will with it, and some of the references, or all of them, if the description allows for it, will be posted in the description down below. Now, continuing on with the fat-soluble vitamins, we've already talked about vitamin A. Next up is vitamin D. And some of the best sources would be getting it from sunlight, but if you can't get it from sunlight, it would be cod liver oil, trout, salmon, and white mushrooms. It's actually quite interesting with white mushrooms because they have a higher vitamin D content if they've been exposed to UV light. So looking at the numbers, we see that a good way to get vitamin D would be to get sun exposure for around 10 to 15 minutes 3 times a week. If you can't do that, a great alternative would be to do 1 tablespoon of cod liver oil. That would get you 1.7 times your daily recommended allowance. And then some other good alternatives would be trout, salmon, and then mushrooms. Not doing too shabby, 46% for 1 serving size of white mushrooms. Next up, vitamin E. And here a great source of vitamin E is sunflower seeds. It's followed up by almonds, hazelnuts, avocado, and spinach. And looking at the numbers for recommended daily allowance, we see that just 1 ounce of sunflower seeds get you pretty much 50% there on your way to your recommended daily allowance target. Whereas 3 ounces of avocado gets you pretty much 12% of the way, so almost 1/10 of your vitamin E intake. Now, something that's interesting to note about vitamin E is that although you can find lots of it in seed oils and vegetable oils, the reason as to why I haven't included them here is that they often contain, or they do contain, lots of omega-6 fatty acids, and these tend to promote inflammation. So one would rather want to consume omega-3 fatty acids, which help to reduce inflammation. Now, next up would be vitamin K, and you can get these from fermented foods like natto and lots of different leafy greens, right? Collards, turnip greens, spinach, and kale. In fact, looking at the numbers, specifically for natto, right, this type of fermented foods like fermented beans, you'd be able to get 7 times the daily, in this case, not just a recommended daily allowance, but sort of a daily adequate intake, like an average that you'd be good to get in. You'll get 7 times the daily adequate intake from consuming just 1 serving size of natto, this fermented food. Then, from eating collards, right, like half a cup of collards, 440% of your daily adequate intake, right? If you do turnip greens, they'd be 355%, absolutely crazy numbers. So lots of vitamin K in fermented foods and these leafy greens. Now, next up, we move into the water-soluble category. So the water-soluble vitamins. These are the ones you can eat more of because they get flushed out by your urine, or with your urine. And some good sources of the first one, vitamin B1, also called thiamine, would be pork, trout, black beans, mussels, and brown rice. Looking at the recommended daily allowance, we see that both pork and trout, together with black beans, are all quite evened out, right? 1 portion, 1 serving size of each of these foods would contribute to 33% of your recommended daily allowance. Now, for vitamin B1, dairy, fruits, and vegetables are not really that high in vitamin B1, but when you eat a large amount of these, they become a significant source. Next up, B2, also called riboflavin. You can get riboflavin from beef liver, milk, beef, clams, and Swiss cheese. And looking at the numbers in particular, we see that if you eat 3 ounces, so a portion size of beef liver, you get over 2 times your recommended daily allowance. Whereas the second best or second most dense food in terms of vitamin B2, that being a cup of milk, would provide you with almost 40%. So a huge gap between these foods. You start to see why beef liver gets such a good rap online. Now, for vitamin B2, this riboflavin, it's actually destroyed by exposure to sunlight. So foods with riboflavin should not be stored in clear containers exposed to light. Something worth noting. The next up is niacin, also called vitamin B3, and you should get it again from beef liver, chicken breast, turkey breast, salmon, and tuna. It's really just lots of animal foods. Looking at the numbers again, we see that beef liver has a significant lead, with 3 ounces, 1 portion size, contributing to 93% of your recommended daily allowance. Next up is pantothenic acid, also called vitamin B5, and again, beef liver leading the way, followed by shiitake mushrooms, sunflower seeds, chicken breasts, and then avocado as well being a significant source of vitamin B5. In fact, looking at the numbers, we see that beef liver, again, more than 1.6 times the daily adequate intake by just one portion size. But then also shiitake mushrooms, not too shabby though. Half a cup of shiitake mushrooms would get you halfway towards your daily adequate intake goal, whereas half an avocado would contribute to 20% of your daily adequate intake. Now, for pantothenic acid, so vitamin B5, it's actually found in all living cells, so it's found in almost all plant and animal foods to some degree. Next up is B6. This is called pyridoxine, and you can find it in chickpeas, beef liver no longer in place number 1 though for this food, and you can also find it in tuna, specifically yellowfin tuna, salmon, sockeye salmon in particular, and potatoes. Looking at the numbers for RDA, we see that 1 cup of chickpeas would get you 65% of the way towards your RDA, and 3 ounces of beef liver 50% of the way, together with, or 53% of the way, together with yellowfin tuna. Next up, B7. This is called biotin. And biotin is found in beef liver, again back in place number 1. You can find it in eggs, whole eggs. You can have it in salmon, in pork, and in sweet potato. And looking at the daily adequate intake, we see that you get your entire daily adequate intake from just a single portion size of beef liver, and you get 1/3 of the way there by consuming just a singular egg. So 3 eggs and you're there. Next up is B9, and this is folic acid or folate. Folate is a vitamin B9 found in natural foods, whereas folic acid is a synthetic version. And even though the body absorbs folic acid, like the synthetic version, better than folate, it's simply not present in food. It has to be in fortified food items. So when it comes to folate, you can find it in beef liver, in spinach, in black-eyed peas, white rice, and asparagus. And we see that none of these foods have a truly big lead, as we've seen with some other examples, but a portion size of beef liver gets you pretty much halfway there, and then foods such as white rice and asparagus, a couple of spears or half a cup of white rice, get you pretty much a fourth of the way there, 22% of your RDA. Next up would be vitamin B12, cobalamin, and this is exclusively from animal foods. And beef liver back in place number 1, clams, oysters, salmon, and then ground beef. In fact, looking at the numbers, we see a ridiculous number here for the beef liver. A single portion of beef liver, so not fully 90 grams of beef liver, will get you almost 30 times your recommended daily allowance of vitamin B12. Then for the clams, you get 7 times the recommended daily allowance for a portion size. For oysters, it would be more than 6 times the recommended daily allowance. And then salmon and just ground beef, each of them a single portion size, like all of these foods are 3 ounces, right? Then these foods would also contribute to your full recommended daily allowance. So it's quite insane. In fact, vitamin B12 is naturally found in animal foods, right? It's generally not present in plant foods, and the body absorbs vitamin B12 from animal sources much better than plant sources. So vegans and vegetarians might have to supplement or be a bit aware of B12. Next up, lots of beautiful colors here for vitamin C, also sometimes called ascorbic acid. And the best source I've found for this is actually red peppers, followed by orange juice. And then you have oranges and grapefruit juice sort of sharing a bit of a spot there, followed by kiwi fruit and then green peppers. Right, like looking at the numbers for daily adequate intake, we see that just half a cup of red peppers would get you all of the way there to your daily adequate intake. Similarly to just 3/4 of a cup of orange juice. And then looking at a single orange or 3/4 of a cup of grapefruit juice will get you pretty close, 78%. One medium-sized kiwi, being quite a small amount of food, I'd say, would get you 71% of the way, and half a cup of green peppers, as opposed to red peppers, would get you 2/3 of the way there. So, interesting to see that. Also, cooking with vitamin C-rich foods or storing them for a long period of time can reduce the vitamin C content. Some sources suggest that microwaving and steaming vitamin C-rich foods may reduce cooking losses. So a bit of a sort of interesting case to consider here. And some people also say that exposure to light can reduce vitamin C content. Basically, my takeaway from this is that if you want vitamin C-rich foods to be as nutritious as they can be, don't cook them. Simple. Now, looking at the honorary vitamins, basically the vitamin-like nutrients that are also needed by the body, here we have choline and carnitine, right? Choline is found in beef liver, in eggs, in beef, in soybeans, and in chicken breasts. And looking at the daily adequate intake values, we'd see that there's no huge discrepancy here, but beef liver is absolutely in a solid first place, right? The portion size of beef liver will get you 2/3 of the way to your daily adequate intake. Next up, carnitine. You can get carnitine from lots of animal sources, so beef steak, ground beef, whole milk, codfish, and chicken breasts. And for the recommended daily allowance, not too many concrete, well, some ranges here, no super specific values, but we see that beef is a phenomenal source, giving you way more than the recommended daily allowance for just a single portion size. So I recommend a daily allowance of 15 milligrams, and way more than that for just a single portion size of the beef steak or ground beef. Whereas you get some carnitine, not too much though, from a cup of milk, or from a portion size of cod, or from chicken breasts. So this leads us to the minerals. And minerals are, you've got 16 of these suckers that you need to get into your body, ideally, right? And your body uses these for keeping your bones, muscles, your heart and brain working properly, right? And they're also important for making enzymes and hormones that contribute to lots of processes in your body. In fact, you've got two categories of these. You've got major or macro minerals, which you need in a larger amount. And then you've got trace minerals, which you need a lower amount of. So, starting off with the major minerals, you might have heard of the first one, calcium, right? Used to strengthen your bones and teeth and all of that jazz. And it's found in lots of different dairy products, right? So plain yogurt, mozzarella, sardines actually, specifically in oil, like if it's canned sardines in oil with small edible bones. Then you can also find it in whole milk and in tofu. So for the vegans out there, we've got an option. And looking at the recommended daily allowance values, we see that none of these are really making a huge leap from the rest of them. But 8 ounces, for example, of yogurt would get you pretty much 1/3 of the way to your recommended daily allowance, and then 1/4 of your way if you eat a portion size of mozzarella or a portion size of sardines. Next up is phosphorus, and sort of similar, lots of dairy products that can be consumed here as well. Yogurt, milk, then you've got Atlantic salmon, scallops, and again, mozzarella cheese. Looking at the RDA, we see that 6 ounces will get you 1/5 of the way to your recommended daily allowance in terms of yogurt, and 1.5 ounces of mozzarella cheese gets you 16% towards your target. So all of these are quite neatly grouped together. There are no large disparities in terms of phosphorus density in these foods. Now, next major mineral would be magnesium, and this is actually found in a few seeds and nuts. In fact, pumpkin seeds and chia seeds perform the best here I've seen based on the stats. Then we've got almonds, spinach, and cashews. Looking at the RDA, we can see that just a single ounce of pumpkin seeds gets you more than 1/3 of the way there, more than 1/4 of the way there for 1 ounce of chia seeds, and then almonds, and pretty much same amount of magnesium in 1 serving size of almonds, in spinach, and in cashews. Next up is sodium, and sodium is it's found in salt, and it's often said that sodium will find you. It's in so many different foods that we would consume that it's not really a problem to get too little of it. I mean, there is sort of this minimum threshold where you want to get like 500 milligrams of sodium per day, but you don't necessarily want to have much more than 1500 milligrams, or that sort of daily adequate intake. Like, not necessarily the upper end, but it suffices, to put it that way, right? And lots of processed foods, they're high in sodium content because they contain lots of salt and lots of sugar, right? So by extension, they'll have lots of sodium in them. Whereas unprocessed food, like just regular food items, won't really have that much sodium in them. It's actually interesting to look at a bit of a comparison here on the right? If you look at sodium from processed versus unprocessed foods, you'll see that sodium would actually be, like, in some cases, it differs. Like, some of these aren't that, like, there aren't that stark differences between some of them. But for example, looking at beef, like, if you get processed beef, then it might contain as much as, in this case, 19 times as much sodium as just unprocessed regular beef that you cook or sear or just prepare yourself. So quite interesting stat right there. Next up is chloride, and this is also in salt, right? Salt, or like just regular table salt that we're familiar with, is just sodium chloride. It's got about 40% of sodium, 60% of chloride. And you can also find it in seaweed, in shrimp, and lots of different condiments such as soy sauce and ketchup and the like. And yeah, no particular values there though in terms of how much is in the different foods. But you get it from salt passively, and you have the RDA sort of daily adequate intake values there for basically 2 grams per day. Differs a bit depending on age, but that's more or less where you should be at. As for potassium, potassium is usually associated with bananas. At least that's what I'm thinking. Like if someone says potassium, my mind just goes banana, right? If you get Borat singing the national anthem of Kazakhstan, right, and he says #1 exporter of potassium, my mind sort of goes immediately to banana. Anyway, that's a bit of a segue, but my point is that bananas, even though they're associated with potassium, aren't necessarily that impressive when it comes to the potassium content. You see, foods such as apricots, like dried apricots, lentils, acorn squash, raisins, like dried prunes, these do perform a bit better, at least per portion size, right? Looking at the data right here, we see that half a cup of dried apricots would give you 16% of your daily adequate intake of potassium, whereas one medium-sized banana would give you about 9%. So granted, there's not a huge difference. It's not like bananas are doing really poorly, but it's not like some of the cases of beef liver where it's like just completely distancing the rest of the foods in the leap for making the most, for having the most dense, being the most dense food in terms of a particular micronutrient, right? Next up is sulfur, and there's a bit of a discussion whether sulfur is actually a major mineral or not, but I've included it here as a major mineral to sort of complete the list. And you can find it in lots of different foods, but an interesting category to list here is like allium vegetables, so particularly garlic, onions, shallots, these types of veggies. You can also find it in lots of different meats, in turnips, in nuts and seeds, and grains and legumes. So lots of varied sources, and I couldn't really find a recommended daily allowance for sulfur, but a good recommendation would be to add just allium vegetables in your cooking, right? Garlic, onions, and shallots. Next up would be trace minerals, right? This is the category of minerals that you don't need in as high of a as much of as you would the major minerals, right? And first up is iron. Iron is used to produce, right, hemoglobin and these types of molecules in your body that help transport oxygen. It's really important if you want to be able to perform at a peak level. And you can find iron in oysters, in white beans, in beef liver, lentils, and even dark chocolate, although this is a bit of a sort of controversial one, right? Like looking at a recommended daily allowance there, we see that you get pretty much the same amount from a portion or serving size of oysters and white beans, then a bit less in beef liver, but still a decent amount, some in lentils, and then 11% of your RDA is met by 1 ounce of dark chocolate. But it's a bit tricky because, I mean, usually they're processed quite a bit, right? And you've got quite a bit of sweeteners or sugar added to these. So it's not necessarily the best food, but it's a bit of an interesting one to add in there. So I put it on the list. Now, iron is divided into 2 categories. You've got heme and non-heme, basically animal-based and plant-based iron, right? And the animal-based version is absorbed better by your body, whereas the non-iron version is better absorbed the non-plant-based version is absorbed better when you eat it together with animal-based foods, or foods that contain lots of vitamin C, such as citrus fruits, right? Strawberries, sweet peppers, tomatoes, and broccoli. Next up is manganese, and manganese can be found in mussels, hazelnuts, pecans, brown rice, and black tea. Looking at some actual numbers for this, we see that mussels are distancing the other foods here quite significantly, right? Like leaving them in the dust, to be honest. Just one portion size of mussels gives you 2.5 times the daily adequate intake of manganese, whereas something as a 1 cup of a black tea would give you 22% of your daily adequate intake. So you have to drink a few cups to fill it up with the tea, whereas the mussels, you eat 1 portion of this and it's not really enough to fill you up for a full meal, right? Like 85-90 grams of mussels. But that would be like 2.5 times, so significant difference. Next up is copper, and copper can be found in beef liver, in oysters, in baking chocolate, right? Here's like unsweetened has been specified. And then you have potatoes and actually crab, like this Dungeness crab. Looking at the values there again, wild numbers for copper, right? Beef liver, like 1 portion of this would give you 1,300, almost 1,400% of your recommended daily allowance. That's almost 14 times as much as you need for a single day. 1 portion of oysters would give you more than 5 times the recommended daily allowance. 1 ounce of chocolate, right, that would get you all the way there. And then you also, like, just from a singular potato, you're 3/4 of the way there. And 3 ounces of crab would get you a significant amount of copper as well. Next up is iodine, and iodine is connected to your thyroid gland, and so the production of the thyroid hormone. And you can find iodine in cod, in nori, a type of seaweed, in oysters, in Greek yogurt, and in iodized salt. And looking at the numbers right there, we see that cod gives you pretty much, from one portion size of cod, you get pretty much all the way there for your RDA, and just a quarter of a tablespoon of iodized salt would get you halfway there. So not much iodized salt needed at all to reach that level. But then again, many people don't really used iodized salt in their cooking or when they're eating, so you might not get that much iodine, to be fair. Now, zinc is the next one. Zinc is really important for the production of testosterone, and it's found in oysters, in beef, in blue crab, oats cooked with water specifically, right? But with milk, it's not bad either, when you get some of the dairy benefits, right? And you can also find it in pumpkin seeds. And looking at the numbers there, we see that oysters are performing way better than the other food groups right there. Than the other foods, we see that one portion of oysters would give you almost 3 times the recommended daily allowance, whereas food number 2 in line would give you just 35% of your RDA, right? That being a portion size of beef. Now, the interesting thing about zinc is that, lots of legumes and whole grains, seeds and nuts, they contain this thing called phytates, right? They contain phytates, and they're a type of anti-nutrient, and basically they block the absorption of nutrients, right? And in particular, in the case of phytates, they can decrease the absorption of iron, magnesium, calcium, and zinc. LOL, right? So the thing here would be if you eat certain legumes or grains or seeds that have lots of phytates in them for the reason of increasing the amount of zinc in your body, you would eat these foods, right? And they would have the anti-nutrient phytates and the anti-nutrient phytates in them, and that would lower the absorption of the zinc. That's a bit of a sort of thing to wrap your head around. But anyways, one solution for this, to remove or deactivate the anti-nutrients, can be to soak, sprout, or boil the food, right? So boiling spinach, for example, sprouting and soaking different seeds, those are good approaches to lowering the amount of anti-nutrients. Next up is fluoride, and some good sources of this, or at least the most significant sources of fluoride would literally be toothpaste, to some extent mouthwash. And even though you're not supposed to eat your toothpaste or drink your mouthwash, it's sort of inevitable that parts of your toothpaste and your mouthwash will be digested when you're brushing your teeth and using mouthwash. That's just how it goes. Next up, fluoridated tap water. In lots of countries, they're actually adding fluoride to the tap water, and in some companies they're also adding fluoride to bottled water. And you can find small amounts of fluoride in black tea, coffee, and shrimp, as you see here from the data, right? Not a significant amount of fluoride in black tea, coffee, or shrimp, at least not if you consider that the RDA is 3 to 4 milligrams. But you get a significant amount of fluoride from tap water or bottled water, or from your toothpaste if you're eating or using regular toothpaste. Now, next up would be selenium. And here, if you're anything like me, you're linking selenium to Brazil nuts, right? But there are some other foods that you can list here as well. For example, tuna, sardines again, shrimp, and then pork and beef, right? But this is mind-blowing to me, because looking at the numbers for the RDA, we see that eating a single ounce of Brazil nuts, that being 6 to 8 individual nuts, gets you almost 10 times the recommended daily allowance. That to me is mind-boggling, because what that means by extension, right, is that if you eat a singular Brazil nut, one Brazil nut, that gets you pretty much the entire recommended daily allowance for your day in terms of selenium. I mean, it would actually get you a bit more if we're going out of based on these numbers entirely. So yeah, just crazy numbers. But then tuna as well, one portion of tuna, almost 1.7 times the RDA. But yeah, selenium from Brazil nuts is just unrivaled, absolutely incredible. Now, something that's interesting about selenium though is that people don't necessarily eat that much Brazil nuts. Most people actually get their selenium from red meat, from poultry, from eggs, dairy, breads, beans, lentils, all of these other food sources. And that's basically because even though there is not necessarily that much selenium in them, at least not if you compare it to the giant, that being the Brazil nut, then people just eat so much of the other types of foods that even though the amount of selenium in them is low, you end up accumulating quite a bit of selenium from those foods. Now, next up is chromium, and chromium is one of those lesser known sort of minerals, and it can be found in lots of varied food groups. Like you can get it from ham, from brewer's yeast, from beef, lettuce, and turkey breast. But looking at the numbers, none of these sources are sort of like overwhelming in terms of like chromium density. You can get 10% of your daily adequate intake from a portion of ham or from a tablespoon of brewer's yeast, but that's not as significant as some of the other food sources that we've seen. But chromium is one of those things that, like, if you use stainless steel equipment to process or cook your food, that can actually increase the chromium content of food because small amounts of chromium transfer over to the food. So there you go. If that's a good thing or not, I guess you'd have to research further, but that can increase the amount of chromium you get into your system. Next up is molybdenum, definitely the best name of this entire list. And you can get molybdenum from black-eyed peas, from beef liver, lima beans, milk, and potatoes. And we actually see that black-eyed peas perform incredibly well in the molybdenum department, providing you with more than 6 times of your recommended daily allowance by just half a cup of black-eyed peas. There you go. Beef liver also significant source. Beef liver and lima beans perform at the exact same level. One portion of each of them will give you more than 2 times the recommended daily allowance. Now, next up is cobalt. Sort of discussed if cobalt is really a mineral at all. Most people, I think, say it's not, but for completeness sake, I'm just including it here. And you can find it in lots of different foods: fish, nuts, broccoli, spinach, and other leafy vegetables. So, where does this actually bring us? What can we sort of summarize from all of this? Well, some of the top tier foods, if you want to get your micronutrients covered, would be beef liver and oysters. As we've seen, for lots of foods, these really just like take the entire winnings, right? Winner takes all. They go above and beyond, and really just give you an incredible amount of micronutrients for lots of these different vitamins and minerals. Now, some other good foods would be seafood, so salmon, trout, clams. Generally, shellfish performs quite darn well. Then you've got egg yolks, and just eggs in general perform quite well. Not necessarily placing top 3 or top 5 in a lot of these food groups, but placing quite high for lots and lots of vitamins and minerals. And then beef is also something that performs quite highly. Now, where does this actually bring us? Well, if you want to optimize your micronutrients, what you'd ideally want is a varied diet, right? So you want to have a protein base where you eat beef and chicken and pork and turkey, eggs, salmon, trout, tuna, right? All of these good protein foods. You want to eat good vegetables, right? So you want to eat your broccoli, your cauliflower, your kale, your spinach, your asparagus, your deep green and colored vegetables for that vitamin A, right? And you want to have a good fruit base. So you want to be eating your avocados, your bananas, citrus, and berries, and you want to eat good grains and carbs, right? So whether that's rice, sweet potato, white potatoes, whole wheat bread, and oats, these are all phenomenal foods. And then extras in addition to this would be your nuts, your seeds, your beans, lentils, dairy, right? Your milk and your cheese, right? For example, for the nuts, right? Bringing in those Brazil nuts for that selenium, right? And in addition to this, though, if you have a varied diet, that's already incredibly good in order to set the foundation for like incredibly good vitamins and minerals, and just having lots of energy in the bank, right? Optimizing for testosterone, for muscle growth, optimizing for brain health, and all of these factors. But if you want to take it a step further, go above and beyond, the ideal thing you would do would be to have 1 to 2 meals where you add in some boosters, right? So 1 to 2 meals where you eat some beef, right? Specifically beef liver, and oysters, right? Because these foods really take the cake, and really, like in terms of the B vitamins in particular, they just are an incredible source of micronutrients. A few things I also wanted to mention was like micronutrient deficiencies, because there are a few that are spread worldwide. You have vitamin A, iron, and iodine deficiencies, right? With iron being the most common deficiency worldwide. Vitamin A is actually what gives you produces the pigments in your retina. Iron is what helps you produce hemoglobin and these types of molecules that they carry oxygen. And iodine is linked to your thyroid glands producing thyroid hormone. So these are a bit important to be aware of. Also, supplementation. I'm usually the type of guy that I'd like to get most of my vitamins, most of my minerals from foods and not just supplements, but in some cases it might be difficult to get some of these micronutrients and you might need to supplement. For example, you might need to supplement vitamin D, especially if you get it usually from the sun, but if you live in a cloudy climate, if you have darker skin, or if you stay indoors a lot, you might need vitamin D supplementation. Similarly, B12, especially vegans and vegetarians, right? Iron might be something they need to supplement, magnesium. iodine, zinc, and then selenium, right? And in particular, vitamin D, iron, and zinc are micronutrients they need to be a bit careful with supplementing, because over supplementation may be harmful. But each of these are linked to sort of like different people have different proclivities and are prone to get different things. So you can read these out if you're more interested. But basically, it's just important to be aware of that sometimes you do need some supplementation. Alright, so some other things to keep in mind that I find quite fascinating that I just wanted to bring in here as well is that if you eat lots of tuna, that might contain large amounts of mercury, and it might lead to mercury poisoning. If you eat lots of tomatoes and peppers, these might be high in histamines, and some people might respond really poorly to them, getting rashes and outbreaks on their skin. Next up, if you eat lots of seed oils, these contain high amounts of omega-6, which can lead to inflammation. And if you eat lots of plant foods, these might contain high amounts of anti-nutrients, right? So they're lowering the absorption of various micronutrients that you might be trying to hit. So the bottom line is that whatever changes you might make to your diet and whatever foods you might experiment with, make sure to do your own research, talk to your doctor, and all of that jazz. Above all, listen to your body. See what changes actually occur. Do you feel better? Do you feel more energized? Or do you feel just terrible when something's completely wrong, right? Important to be aware of, because lots of tweaks that you can make can actually have an adverse effect, or they can have a positive effect, right? It comes down to just observing for your body, because we're all different. We all respond differently to different foods. That's why like diet is such a highly individual topic. So I just want to end this video on a bit of a quote, and that is that knowledge is of no value unless you put it into practice. And so with that, don't forget to join the free community. Top link in the description down below. Also, second link down in the description if you want to apply for one-on-one free coaching directly with me. And with that said, keep on training, train what you love, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. If you watched all the way to the end, thank you. This was quite a lengthy video. At least I imagine it is. I'm not sure quite what the time is right now. But regardless, thank you so much. Like the video down below if you enjoyed it. Write a comment if there's something you're curious about, something you want to see, and I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers.